Welcome to HR Coffee Time, the podcast I've made especially for you to help you have a successful and fulfilling HR or people career. If we haven't met before, hello, it's great to have you here. And if you're a long-time listener, it's wonderful to have you back. I'm your host, Fay Wallis, a career and executive coach for HR professionals, and I run the Inspiring HR Leadership Programme, a practical supportive development course for existing and aspiring HR leaders. It's accredited by the Institute of Leadership and designed to help you grow your confidence, your credibility, and your impact in your role. Today's podcast episode is part of a special HR Coffee Time series where we're lifting the lid on the most senior level HR and people role that exists, the Chief People Officer role, also often called the Chief Human Resources Officer role. So they're called CPO and CHRO for short. So if you've ever wondered what it actually involves, or if it's a career step that you'd like to aim for one day, this series is here to help. I ask every Chief People Officer guest who comes on the show the same 9 questions that were chosen by you, the HR Coffee Time listeners, with a few spin-off questions too, depending on what the guest says during the interview that I think you might like to know a little bit more about. The aim of the series is to demystify the CPO role and share real-life experiences, as well as career and leadership advice from people who are actually doing the job. In this episode, I'm joined by the amazing Funmi Onamusi, Chief People Officer at Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, one of the largest mental health trusts in the southeast of England. Funmi has had a rich and non-traditional path into the CPO role, and her role focuses on shaping a compassionate, inclusive, and high-performing culture that truly supports both staff and service users. She's deeply passionate about unlocking potential at every level of an organisation, with a particular focus on equity, accountability, and development. Her current work includes spearheading the delivery of a new 5-year people plan and embedding innovative practices to make the trust an employer of choice. She is incredibly generous and open in sharing her experience and advice with us all, which includes her unique approach to her application when she was applying for the role. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing about it. The strategic skills and habits that help her succeed, and the emotional weight that can come with holding the role. Outside of work, Funmi is a speaker, writer, and the founder of the Breaking 100 Circle, a community interest company that mentors ethnic minority women into leadership roles. She's also a proud wife and mum to 2 teenage sons, and her 6th book, Empower, Elevate, Excel, is due out later this year. I can't wait for you to meet Funmi, but first I very quickly need to say a big thank you to Linda Gent, who recommended her for the show when she saw that I was looking for recommendations for brilliant Chief People Officers. Thank you so much, Linda. Linda has been a long-time listener and supporter of the show. So thank you, Linda. I really appreciate your support. But now let's go ahead and meet Funmi. I hope you're going to enjoy learning from her as much as I did. Welcome to the show, Funmi. It is so wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're really welcome. I can't tell you how grateful I am for you agreeing to come on the show. I just know everyone listening is really grateful too, and we're going to learn so much from you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it too.
Oh, I'm pleased to hear that. And I will dive us straight into our very first question, which is, how did you get your first Chief People Officer role?
So my path hasn't been a straightforward one at all. I want to say that it was an intentional one, and the truth is it wasn't either. What I did do is I had a solid foundation in accounting, business advisory, strategy type roles, through my work in management consulting and leadership roles across the third sector before finally moving into healthcare. But the real turning point for me came when I started positioning myself as someone who was supporting strategy and began to step into the role or roles that gave me an opportunity to shape change. And what that meant was the shaping of change would have come with different job titles, different roles, different industries, different sectors. And I became less welded to the idea of a career trajectory in a particular way, but more positioned as someone who wanted to support change. And that then meant that I would go where I found an affinity or I found a platform to want to do something differently. My first CPO, well, I say my first, this is my first CPO role, but it came at a time when I was ready to move my full self to the table. So my previous role was an executive director of inclusion at a large acute, one of the largest acute hospitals in England. But I wanted to really move into not just being a strategist, a people advocate, a culture shaper. And I was clear that the role, that the value that I was going to bring was one that would give me an opportunity to pull all of my track record on organizational change, leadership development, and all of that into one place because I've done a little bit of everything. And that clarity was when I was actually someone reached out to me to ask if I would be interested in a CPO role in another organization, which I declined at that time. And then I saw this particular role. I just fell in love with everything the role had to offer, but most importantly, the chief executive of the organization. And I applied, and 2 and a bit years later, here I am.
What a brilliant story. It's so interesting hearing everyone's different paths to getting to where they are now.
Mm.
Do you think, or do you know if there was anything in particular that really stood out in your application? Did they tell you after you'd applied and got the job?
After I got the job, I can't say that at the time I knew that would stand out. But the one thing that was clear to me, and I mentioned earlier about bringing my full self. So the one thing that was clear to me was that I was going to apply in a way that was different from before. So my application had my picture, had me telling rather than, your typical application would talk about your all of your work experience.
Mm.
I focused this time on what I had delivered over the last 20 years of my career. So, rather than being welded to each job and all the things I did within each job, I shifted the narrative to say, over the last 20 some years, this is what I have done. I've led this, I've done that, resulting in this. My cover letter, I spoke about the why now, why this organization, and I give them a little bit of a flavor for my personal circumstances, talked about my family, talked about my husband, my children. Those were all in my application. And for me, I was like, this is me. And if you think me is interesting enough, then give me a call.
I can just imagine everyone listening is thinking, oh my gosh, we need to see a copy of this incredible application.
I have shared it with many friends since then. but
Oh,
this is my thinking was they'll either look at that and go, what on earth is this? You know, let's not touch her with a badge pole. Or they'll look at it and go, do you know what? We want that person in front of us. We want to have a conversation with her. And for me, I would rather, you know how you think about separating the wheat from the chaff. I would rather know that I am making someone's shortlist because they genuinely are interested in what I have to say, and what they think I'm bringing to the table. So that is one thing that I know I did differently. The other thing I did was, and I can't claim credit for this. I mean, when you're applying for a senior role in the NHS, it is given that you reach out to the people. You want to speak to the hiring manager, who in this case was the chief exec. I wanted to speak with the incumbent in the post. So for me, those were two people that I knew I absolutely needed to speak with beforehand. And I had such a lovely conversation with the chief exec. And I remember asking her the question, is there anyone else you think I need to talk to before the interview? And she was like, oh yes, absolutely. I'll get my business manager to send you a list of people I think you need to talk to. And her business manager sent me a list of 10 names. So ended up talking to about 12 people before I went for the interview. And what that meant was by the time I went into the interview, I had a very good grasp of what my narrative was, of what value I thought I could bring, of what gaps I thought I had. And I was clear in talking to everybody. This is what I'm bringing to the table. Do you genuinely think what I'm bringing to the table is going to be valuable? And it's really interesting to be able to hear from all the different people what they found fascinating in my experience. And I was able to pull all those things together and then go into my interview with, look, I've spoken to all these people. This is what they think this organization needs, and this is why I tick the box. So it was a really interesting experience for me.
It's so fantastic to hear you describe all of that because for the person listening to us talking right now, even if they are much, much earlier on in their career,
Mm,
this is advice that as a career coach, I often give if someone's saying to me they found a job that they want to apply for and they really want it. It isn't one they're just thinking, yeah, maybe I'll give it a
mm,
shot. They're prepared to go all in. And I'll always say, try and speak to people who are in the organization already. See if you can speak to the hiring manager, find out what it is they're really looking for. Because, I mean, we all know working in HR with the best will in the world, when you advertise a job, it may not be what you're putting in that job advert, may not be a full
a full
reflection
reflection. Yeah.
of what they're really looking for in the
Yeah.
role. And then on the other side of it, when you're the person who is interviewing a candidate for a role, the candidates who really stand out are the ones who have managed to find out about the organization, about its challenges, about the team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just amazing to hear you talking about this because I think many people feel nervous about doing it and
Mm.
they don't necessarily realize, just some people don't realize they can even do that. I have had people
Yeah.
say to me,
I
oh, would
didn't
that
know
be
I could do that until I got into the NHS. So yes, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
it's great to hear it's encouraged in the NHS.
Oh, it is encouraged, and actually, I would go as far as saying it is expected. So,
Oh.
so there are certain roles, especially if it's a senior level role, where it is actually seen as a negative thing if you don't do that,
Mm.
because then the people would then tend to say, how could you possibly demonstrate how interested you are in the role if you're not going to speak with a hiring manager? Because then to your point, it means there's an assumption that everything I need to know is in the job description, and we both know that's not the case. And when it's a really senior role, you want to pick up the things that are not in the job description. You want to talk to people who can tell you, give you additional flavors of what the role entails, and what they want from the role, and so on and so forth. So for me, that was a really big learning, and that is something that I always advise other people. And I say sometimes that can also help you deselect yourself from the process. And I certainly have done that, where I've applied for a role and spoken to a couple of people and I've just gone, you know what? I don't think this is for me.
The next question is for you, what has been the biggest difference between being a head of people or head of HR or HR director or people director? And I know when I sent you the questions in advance, you said, oh, I'm not sure about this one, Faye, because I haven't come through a conventional route. That's not a job title I've necessarily had.
Mm,
So I'd like to just reassure you and say, please don't worry about that because I know you'll be familiar with
mm,
heads of HR or HR directors or people directors, whether we're using people or HR.
mm.
So perhaps what I should say is, what's the biggest difference you can see between the chief people officer role and the director level role?
My view is the biggest difference now being in my role and having a director of HR within my team and associate directors within my team. The biggest difference that I would say is that the difference, or straddling that line between operational delivery and strategic delivery. And what do I mean by that? So operational delivery is the all too important, and I'm saying this really carefully because the intention is not to suggest that one is more important than the other. You run an organization off the back of all the operational bits that need to happen. a head of a director of in some organizations will go as far as saying, if I were the head of recruitment, what would I need to do? How do I ensure that we get people from vacancies into jobs, into vacancies, or filling vacancies, moving and planning for our workforce? If I were sat in education and training, I'm involved in the day-to-day of ensuring that our statutory mandatory trainings are done. I'm ensuring that people have the core skills and competencies that they require to be able to do their job and do that in a safe and effective way. If I were sat in workforce planning, I'm ensuring that we have the right people at the right place at the right time and that we've done all the planning to, do you see what I mean? And then on and on and on it goes. And that for me is the operational bit of getting person A doing A at this time and so on and so forth. The CPO role for me is recognizing all of those buckets I've just talked about, knowing their place, and ensuring that you have the people and you're enabling the people to do those things, delivering them for the organization whilst you hold strategic ownership and responsibility for the wider ambition around our people. So recognizing the entirety of our people, but from a strategic point of view, rather than that really down there operational. Now, what is the downside to being completely operational and not strategic? It means there's no forward thinking. It means we can't really think ambitiously. It means we will always think of our people. We would never think of our people as a resource or as an asset. We will think of our people as something that needs to be managed as opposed to this really amazing resource that helps us deliver everything we do have. And for me, having the headspace to be able to step out, to really think above, just a teeny tiny bit above everything else, and then go, what needs to happen? And then joining the dots and thinking about leading practice, taking the best and moving it to the rest, and knowing how we need to do that and being able to look down a pathway to say, what should 3 years look like? What should 5 years look like? And therefore, what do I need to be doing today so I can be where we need to be in 5 years' time? And then being that really strategic partner to the rest of the chief officers, i.e. the other, chief medical, chief exec, and so on and so forth. For me, that would be the real difference from just operating as a head of. Now, what's the downside to be so strategic and having no operational knowledge? It means you have your heads in the clouds without any grounding in terms of the delivery. So for me, the CPO role is the one that has the ability to straddle the line effectively. Don't know if that helps.
It helps hugely. It's so interesting hearing you talk about it. And I know that lots of people can find it really, really hard to let go of the operational stuff, to be able to properly move into that strategic place. I know I'm going to ask you a bit later on for advice around skills that are helpful, but can I just laser in on this for 1 second and ask you if there's one thing in particular that has helped you to be able to let go of the operational work and take that strategic view?
I think I have to admit that it's a bit unfair. I've had the advantage of not having come through that traditional operational uh, line. So I never started my career, or when going through so I was a HR advisor, HRBP. I didn't go through that very operational way. So I kind of have that going for me as a benefit. But the one of the things that I have shared with people is, and I came up with what I call the top 10 tips, and I'm very happy to share them with you, Faye, actually, that we can put in the postscript of the podcast.
That would be great. Thank you. I'll definitely pop that in the show notes for
In the
everybody.
show notes, yes. But one of them for me was around presence. And I share 10 tips that I say are are 10 tips that HR leaders should practice to move them from operational to strategic. And one of them was, I said, presence. But presence, and what do I mean by presence? Number one was knowing your data, but being able to tell a story with your data. So I encounter a lot of our people colleagues who know their data, they know their space, but they can't correlate or connect what it really means. Being able to answer that "and so what" question. So someone can tell you, there are we have 60 vacancies in this department, and I am trying to get you 60 people to plug the 60 vacancies, and that's it. And all of the activity is around that. But is there insight? And I say you can do that and you'll be respected and known, and it'll be said that Funmi is fantastic at plugging our vacancies. But you begin to move quite in a different way. If Funmi could show up at a meeting next time and Funmi is able to say, I have noticed that we operate this cyclical pattern where every 3 years our vacancy moves from 30 to 60. And then we spend the next 3 years trying to do all the activity to recruit the additional 30 people. So I have gone to check, and every 3 years we've got 25 people who drop off because they reach retirement age. So therefore they drop off. And then every 3 years we have this number of our student nurses, or whatever the case may be, who move on and go to the neighboring trust because that's the point where they move to this band. Da 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 da. And then suddenly what you're doing is you're taking the data that where you've only ever done activity on, but now you're finding insights that you're taking to your audience, and then you're presenting. So you're bringing value add in a way that suddenly people see you. And I always say the first step to being a strategic leader is to be visible. And being visible is when you're known for something that is not activity, but insight. So that's just one of the 10. Like I said, I had 10 examples, but there are specific things that we can begin to do to move ourselves from just being operational to being strategic. The person where your insight is sought, not just because we've made the decision and we need you to make it happen, where you're being collaborated with as part of making that decision.
It's incredible hearing you say this, because I think it was 2 guests ago, so one of my other guests who I interviewed, she talked about this very thing, like how important data, getting to grips with data and being able to tell a story and explain it is. So I think it's really reassuring for all of us listening to hear, this is a thing, this is coming up again and again. And it was brilliant just hearing how you brought it to life with that example. But also tied into that, you've touched on this idea of visibility. And I think there are quite a few messages out there telling us all how important it is to be visible to succeed in your career. But it's not always obvious how on earth you do that. So it's just brilliant to have that really concrete example. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the next question I need to ask you is, once you'd started your Chief People Officer role, how was it different to what you'd expected?
So this is the thing. My last role I mentioned was an executive director role for inclusion in my previous organization. So I understood already what it meant to serve on a board. And before then, I had been on a board role in a previous, in the third sector. So that was my third board level role already. I suppose what it meant to work and serve as a board member, I already had exposure to that. So in my mind, I thought, okay, I already know what that looks like. I already know what working within the NHS looks like. I'm just taking on a bigger portfolio. So I expected the challenge of a bigger portfolio. And I knew that would be slightly challenging. What I hadn't fully appreciated was how emotionally and politically complex it would be, i.e., the weight of responsibility for culture, for people experience, for system wide transformation, but delivered locally. and how intense that would feel, especially when you are navigating complex priorities and trying to deal with legacy systems. Uh, but I don't want it to sound negative, because what I also didn't expect was how fulfilling it would be to be trusted with shaping the people experience at such a scale, to be at a position to influence how care can be delivered by caring for the people who give the care. That is an immense privilege. And it's taught me that CPO roles aren't just strategic, they're deeply human. So, whilst I've talked earlier about being strategic, I love, when I get the email from the person who is upset about something to do with their pay, or something to do with their induction, something that you might consider is too mundane for a CPO. And don't get me wrong, there are sometimes I get sent the emails I get cross about, but sometimes the ability to get an email about something and be in the position to know and respond because I know we're doing something about it, or to send it to one of my senior people team to say, can you help me with, can we investigate that particular concern that this person has? My organization, we've got about 6,000 people who work for us. That is 6,000 souls, people who then have families who are impacted by the things that we do. So, and that means when we make decisions that really impacts people positively, I know that the rich could go to 18, 20,000, depending on how, family sizes and so on and so forth. So I hadn't quite fully grasped that. They're the highs and lows of that, because, when it's really positive and I go on site visits and someone tells me about hearing something I said or did and how that's really helped them, it makes me feel, like we are really making a change. We're really doing something good. And when someone's really angry, that is something to reflect on as well. So I think that it's the balance of how challenging and how fulfilling. It's two extreme highs and lows, but part of the course.
Hearing you talk about those challenges and that weight of responsibility makes me feel that the next best question to ask you is one that is about well-being. So I'm just going to find it in front of me, as I do not know these all off by heart yet, but I'm sure I will eventually. So the question is, how do you maintain your mental well-being in such a high priority and demanding role?
Oh my goodness.
Share all your secrets.
I was going to say, oh Lord. So this is one where I could give you a very pretty answer. I'll give you the pretty answer first, and then I will tell you the truth that I fail spectacularly at I fail, I succeed, and then I fail, then I succeed, and I fail, and it means that it's an ongoing journey. And the day that I'm coasting on doing it perfectly, I'll come back to you. But in the meantime, I treat rest as a strategy. I like to think that I have set firm boundaries around my non-negotiables, which is my time with my family, my spiritual practice. And for me, that entails journaling, praying, taking retreats. And the truth is, I fail at those things I've just listed, but I do balance it by surrounding myself with people who let me be for me and not just the CPO. And so that is a core part. I have also learned not to carry everything alone. So, delegation, having trusted advisors, having honest conversations with peers are crucial. I've learned quite early on in my leadership career that vulnerability isn't a weakness. Now, I know that there are people whose everything about them is how they portray this and exude this charisma, this persona of being on top of things all the time. That's not me. my leadership strength is that I can be vulnerable. And I do admire people who look like they've got it together all the time. It's just exhausting to be that, and I don't pretend to be that at all. I am eternally grateful though for my current organization. And I have what I believe to be the best CEO in the world. I work with a team of executive colleagues who practice vulnerability as well, and they genuinely put people first. I have a deputy CPO who I am thankful for every day, and my own senior people team who they wouldn't give up on their strive for us to be the best for the people who work in our organization. So for me, I have no doubt that when people see me shine, when people say to me, "Oh, for me, we think you're doing amazing. We think you're a great CPO." I have no doubt in my mind that it is because of the tireless hard work of an entire army of dedicated people, right from my chief exec down to my team that making it happen. And for me, knowing that that exists, I have to say is the number one part of maintaining my mental health and well-being. And the reason I say that is because I could list the other things I said earlier about firm boundaries, about rest as a strategy, about all those other things. But because I know that I feel on the rest as a strategy, so I try to rest, I set firm boundaries, but sometimes I work until 4 a.m. This week I've been in back to back meetings all week, which means I know that I will be working this weekend, even though I like to say I have firm boundaries around that. So that's what I mean by,
Mm.
but the reason I can do that is because I know, what I talked about, those trusted relationships, my executive team, my chief exec, my own team, my deputy, and having just that group for me is number one. And then I have my other things, my strategy and my boundaries would then be the other two things.
For me, I can't thank you enough for giving such an honest answer. I think it will be incredibly reassuring to lots of people who are struggling to maintain their own well-being and their own balance in their lives, because it can be so easy in this day and age, can't it, to see, I don't know, all of these influencers or people on LinkedIn saying how they've got it all nailed and
Yeah.
they're so strict and brilliant at having balance in their lives. And then for the rest of us mere mortals, it's easy to feel like
We feel
you're
like we're
going wrong
failing.
or
Yeah.
failing in
Mm.
some
Mm-hmm.
way. But
Mm-hmm.
also that point that you've raised about the people around you and also the culture, they are such important pieces to consider as well.
Mm.
It's also brilliant to hear your thoughts, well, your experience, because I really want this series to be a truly valuable resource for people who are considering going into a chief people officer role and really know what it's like. So thank you for not giving us some slick, pretending high level answer. I mean, I'm very lucky no one has done that so far who has been interviewed. But
Mm.
that was one of the things I was a little bit nervous about in setting up this series. Like, how honest would people be? So I feel really grateful to you and to everyone else who's come on the show for that
Oh.
honesty, because it's only really through honesty that we can truly help everybody.
No, true, true. Yeah. Yeah.
You've touched on so many things already,
Mm.
but I know there's even more that you can share, because you mentioned that document that you're going to share about, was it the 9 that can help
My
you?
10
Oh,
tips
10,
for
10. That's it.
moving. Yeah.
The 10 tips. So because I know that there are another 9, I feel excited about asking you this question, but please don't feel obligated to share all 9 with us. So
Mm.
the question is, which skills, habits, or practices have most helped you succeed as a CPO?
So I'll put some disclaimers around this one because there are probably people listening who've been CPOs for 20, 30 years. I've only been a CPO for just over 2 years. So mine is coming from, so I'm saying that not to sound arrogant or cocky. This is just what I have achieved in my time so far. But, but I am tagging on my 10 plus years in leadership roles to that. So just to say, it's not just the CPO part that is in my senior leadership roles. So the number one for me will be strategic thinking, but applying some emotional intelligence to that. And I don't see them as separate. For me, the best strategies are built on a deep understanding of people and systems. You remember earlier I talked about recognizing that I wanted to move into a space of being able to find solutions, and that that was a journey from about 10, 12 years ago, and I was able to do that, and that's why I could change jobs, change titles and things like that. But what was central to that was being able to have a deep understanding of people and systems. So for me, that would be one of the biggest skills that I would say I've had in past life, and then I bring to bear in my role. And when I find myself being dragged into the detail, that operational detail, that's what I use to sort of like, if you think of like a string behind your neck that just pulls you back up, that's what I try to do, to always think with emotional intelligence, but really think strategically, deep understanding of people and systems, rather than trying to think through, this is how we've always done it, this is why we do it how we've always done it, but actually really trying to understand what the issue is rather than what we're doing. So that would be number one. I find that helps me to come up to be really solution focused in my approach to things. And people who know me and in my teams know that I tend to take a very unusual approach, or what might be considered as an unusual approach to problem solving. So you would never hear me go to a problem and say, how are we doing it? It's always, what is the problem? What do we need to do to solve it? And what will tend to happen is that a lot of the how sits within our gift and within our power. And it's just then shifting how we use our people to enable that and break ourselves from the shackles of systems that don't actually serve us. So that would be number one. Number two for me would be listening generously. I love, I do talk, as you can see from this conversation. I talk and I can talk a lot, but I like to think I'm very, very good at listening. Whether when I'm engaging with our frontline staff, with my fellow board members, I listen beyond words. I listen to emotion. I listen for pattern. I listen for potential. Um, I listen for opportunities. I have found that as a habit, that has really served me, because when I then play back what I have heard, the reason I tend to get support for what I do is because I am playing back what people already have on the inside of them, but they've just needed help to bring to the surface. If you see what I mean. And I think I'm just naturally really good at that in terms of picking up solutions and this could be because of my management consulting background, that you pick up the solution in the room that people have. And sometimes because people are in the detail, they can't really see it because they're bogged down by the detail. So because I listen well, that helps me get to solutions quite quickly. And I remember someone saying to me, "Funmi, you always have all the answers." And I said, that's really interesting, because I don't think I have any of the answers. I never have the answer. I never walk into a room with the answers. What I'm good at is listening to the problem as shared by the people in the room. But in their sharing of the problem, I can just see the answers surface. So for me, that's a skill that from when I learned 15, 16 years ago, that was something I was good at. I have honed in on that. So that would be number two. Let me see if I can share another one. Protecting space. So I try to carve out time for reflection. And if I don't, I know that I'll get consumed by the urgent rather than the important. And I have to say, very honestly, because of the whole context nationally that's going on, I am struggling with this particular point at the moment, but it is one that I recognize is of importance. So in the past, I would typically have Friday afternoons clear in my diary, protected, and I call that my action time. So my team know Friday afternoon, don't put meetings in for me. That's the time where I want to sit down. It's either Friday morning or Friday afternoon. So I'm thinking through the week. I'm thinking through the pattern of issues I've dealt with my team. That's my sweet spot of coming up with ideas and solutions and things like that. It's something that I have done for many years. As I say, I'm struggling with it right now, but I think it's a good practice for a senior leader to be able to have in their week time carved out for them to be forward thinking. Otherwise, you're just an operational leader with a fancy CPO title.
It makes such a difference, that reflection time, and it's
Yeah.
really easy to underestimate just how powerful it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to move us along now to a slightly different question, which is about challenge and difficulty.
Hmm.
So, would you be happy to share with us what the greatest challenge is that you've experienced in your time as a CPO?
Oh, this one's easy. For me, that would be driving transformation in a system that is under constant pressure. I mean, it's one thing to write a strategy. It's another to be able to embed it in a way that outlives leadership changes, budget cuts, systemic fatigue. It is really, really easy to go into hibernation mode when we're thinking about cuts. And if you've read the news the last 2 months with the NHS on it, some of the changes we need to make have to be transformative in nature. We cannot tinker around the edges. And I think for me, that is the biggest challenge I am having, which is thinking that problem, I absolutely know how to fix it, but it needs investment. But you're in a place where you're thinking, well, you're not getting any investment. If anything, you need to halve your budget. And it's recognizing that ultimately what the NHS exists for is to offer great care and great outcomes for all of the people that it cares for, which means that we as an organization, in terms of my local organization, but the NHS at large, have to operate more effectively, more efficiently. And the truth is we don't. So it's how do we have those conversations about the things that really need to be changed when the daily conversations around vacancy and turnover and this and and those immediate constant pressures, and then before you know what's happening is 6 months down the line and you're having conversations about, Funmi, you need to reduce your headcount and you need to have less people than you currently have, and what are you doing about that? And there isn't the space to go, how can we completely transform how we offer what we do? So for me, that would be hands down my biggest challenge. My less It's a challenge, but I'm going to admit it's not a big challenge, but it would be wrong not to surface this as a challenge. I am a Black woman in a senior leadership role, and I have sometimes had to lead whilst being questioned or have my worth questioned in ways that others haven't. I also have to admit that is not a challenge that I have faced in my current organization. I mean, there are undertones of it, but again, like I said, not from my current support network. So not my executive team, not my own leadership, my own people team, not even from our own senior leadership team within the organization, but undertones of it in other places. But for me, that is a challenge that has just simply sharpened my clarity, my compassion, my courage. But once you've been used to something your entire career, it's not a deterrent. So I mention it as a challenge because I know there are people who are having it a lot more challenging time of it than I am. And if I didn't use this platform to surface that, then I wouldn't be doing justice to that, if you see what I mean. So I'm mentioning that because I know it is a big challenge for many ethnic minority women in senior roles. And if I only mention transformation without mentioning that, then that would be doing a disservice to that, because there are many people who that is a real problem for.
Again, I'm just so incredibly grateful for your honesty in all of the answers to my questions today. For me, I couldn't agree more how important it is to be able to talk about these things, and for people listening to feel like I'm not alone in experiencing this. And also, it's really inspiring to know that you are in the role that you're in and you are thriving in it. And in fact, one of the things that really leapt out at me when you were just describing your experiences, you said it's sharpened your compassion. And that's not necessarily something I was expecting you to say. Would you be happy to share a little more about how you've coped with the fact that this bias and discrimination does exist and you've experienced it throughout your career?
I think it's sharpened my compassion because my compassion for other people who are experiencing it, and B, because when you've then had compassion shown to you, as I have had compassion shown to me in my more vulnerable moments, that helps you to realize and recognize that sometimes what it looks like to be there for people isn't always what we think it might be. And sometimes being there for people is being present until the time where they can articulate what their need of you is. And it takes you being in a place where your worth is questioned and having somebody else fight for you. Because if you haven't experienced that, it can be exhausting to have the language every time to stand up for yourself, to always feel like you have to be at your best every time. But when you've had it shown to you, and I've had, people in my team, I've had my own chief exec, I've had my own executive team, stand up for me without asking me to say, Fumi, what does standing up for you look like in this space? They've just done it. And then when they've done it, you've gone, oh, that's what that feels like. And for me, when that has happened, what that then means is that as a people leader, recognizing my responsibility for all of the people that work for us, the reason my compassion is sharpened is because now I know what it feels like to have people look out for me. So when I lead with that sort of sharpened clarity around this. This is what I'm here for. This are what my boundaries are, but not in that very edgy way. And I've realized that if you haven't had that compassion shared with you, you are on the edge, and that is the truth. There's a sharp edge to you, and I feel like those edges for me have been softened out.
So much of what you've talked about today, the skills, the strengths that you have that really shine through, are ones that I think for many people, they don't realize how impactful they are for leadership, especially if we're holding on to older, maybe more historical views of what
Yeah.
a strong leader is. And so I think it's just wonderful to hear all of these examples and to hear in everything that you're saying for me and your experience and how you behave at work around vulnerability, around compassion, around listening. I bet if I went out tomorrow and said, oh, let's do a survey on what the top leadership skills are, they wouldn't necessarily be ranking at the top for
No.
everybody. But
Yeah.
hearing you talk about them just really shines a light on how important they are, and how I hope that after people have listened to this, if they do get asked that question, those skills are going to start being more widely acknowledged and recognised as just so important for brilliant leadership. You've already shared so much incredible advice for me, but I am committed to asking everyone the same question. So I'm going to plow on and see if you have even more for us. So the next question is, what advice do you have for anyone listening who would like to be a chief people officer one day?
Right out the gate, number one will be build credibility. But whilst you're building credibility, don't wait for a title to lead. And I think I said this earlier in my earlier part that when I was going to be a chief people officer, that was my first time that I was having that sort of title. But every title that I had, every job that I had had was one where I was building credibility on. And so when I was applying for this role, what I was pulling together, what I was doing was telling a story of everything I had done in a way that was really credible. So if someone's waiting for a title, so I need HR advisor title, then I need this title, and I need that title. Now, don't get me wrong, that is the traditional way. But if you're not on that path, that's okay too. I just believe that if you really want to be a chief people officer one day, then you need to be able to build credibility in whatever job you're doing. You need to be shaping culture from wherever you are. You need to be deeply curious about systems. You need to be curious about equity. You need to be curious about impact. And you need to be investing in relationships as much as you're investing in results. And don't try to fit a mold. I'm definitely not anybody's mold. I'm not, there isn't a story, my story isn't any that exists before. And if you took the entirety of my career trajectory, just go and check on LinkedIn. It is the most unusual thing ever. But I genuinely believe that the world needs CPOs who bring heart as well as head, who bring strategy as well as soul, who bring operations as well as insight, but who can own their unique perspective and let that be your superpower. So that would be my advice.
I love it. Positive, inspiring. I was going to, not easy advice to necessarily follow, but one that everyone's capable of doing, definitely.
Well,
I
it just
really,
simply means that people don't have to try to go back to base. They just need to pick where they are now, of where they are right now, and begin to build from there, as opposed to saying, right, I need to go back to this base now because I need to mirror Sumi's journey. I need to mirror. No, what we're saying is every part of your journey up until now has been useful. So go and tell a story from there and then continue your story from that point.
fantastic. And that brings me along to the next question, which is moving along from someone who would like to be a CPO one day. Let's now think about someone who is. They've just got the CPO role and they are about to start it, but they're a bit nervous about it. What advice would you share with them?
Number one, start by building trust. And the reason that's important is because you don't know everything. And maybe there are some CPOs who know everything, the ones who have had to go around all of the areas of human resources, which probably took them 35 years to then be able to go, yes, now I'm ready to be CPO. Maybe there are some of those sort of people. But if you're not one of those sort of people, then I would say start by building trust. You want to build trust with all of the component parts that make up the people function. And the reason you want to do that is because you know that you don't know everything. But what I'm saying is you don't need to know everything. What you do need to do, though, is to need to learn well. You need to lead wisely, and you need to listen deeply, because remember the skills I mentioned about listening earlier. And how do you do that? Ask good questions. Anchor yourself in your own values. I've talked about vulnerability, so embrace that nervousness. If you're nervous, embrace it. don't then be mediocre because of your nervousness. However, let your nervousness sharpen you. So if I'm nervous about something, I tend to take that to mean that I need to ask more questions in that area. I remember, my current team coming into the team, and I met with all the senior leaders in the team, and I was like, look, you are good at what you do. I'll tell you what I'm really good at. And I told them what I was really good at. And I said, this things I'm really good at. I'm the bee's knees at these things, which means you can come to me for these things. Now you tell me what you're really good at. And I was taking notes. This is what you're really good at. So when I have questions, even though I'm CPO, I'll come to you to learn from you about those things. If other people in the organization ask me questions, I'll come to you for the answers to those things, so that we then build this matrix of respect where the team can rely on me on the things I'm great at, and I can rely on my team for the things that they're great at. And then we build this thing of trust. And so for me, that is how you, hopefully, I think that has worked in my organization, and I think it's worked with other people that I speak to and advise. But that would be my thing. Embrace the nervousness rather than trying to be all bravado about it, to being, yeah, I know everything. Well, you don't. So own that. Let's just get over that and move on from there.
Well, I know that's a big fear for anyone who's thinking of moving into a senior level role, whether that's the CPO role or not, is this fear of, oh my gosh, there's so much that I don't know. So again, I think it's just incredibly helpful to know that's okay, that's normal, that's fine, and you can actually turn it into a strength. So I keep feeling like I just keep saying thank you constantly to me, but thank you. And after I've kept you for all this time, and I know how busy you are, I'm sure it's going to be a bit of a relief to know I'm on the very last question. So the very last question is, are there any courses or qualifications that you've taken that were particularly useful for succeeding as a Chief People Officer?
Well, I feel like that's a trick question, because succeeding almost feels like, that's the end of it. But seeing as I am in the journey of a Chief People Officer, I think maybe someone who's sort of retiring, who can then sort of say, I've been doing this for 30 years and this is what has worked. What I can say is what I have done so far. So earlier in my senior leadership career, I invested a lot in coaching, qualifications, and leadership programs that really deepened my understanding of behavior, of mindset, and of transformation. I also have an MBA, and I'm a chartered fellow of the CIPD. And I'm currently completing not completing, I am going through, undertaking my doctorate in healthcare leadership. And I am a quarter of the way through in my doctorate. So that's been my trajectory. And I can see that a lot of CPOs that I really respect, have sort of, that coaching, leadership, MBA, that they kind of have done all that sort of stuff as well. CIPD, of course. But honestly, I think some of my greatest learning has come from real world challenges. And the reason I need to balance that is to say that if you haven't done all of those things, don't let that then be a deterrent, because remember what we said earlier about not molding yourself after anybody. But those are courses that I have found useful. But remember, at the time I took those courses, I didn't have a CPO trajectory. So I was doing them because I'm a continuous learner. And for me, I've done them because I thought, I'd like to do this. There's some learning and interest in here. But I wasn't doing that because I had a job title, in my future that I was aiming towards. I was doing that because I wanted the learning from those courses and programs. But having said that, as I said, my greatest learning has been real world challenges, good mentors, and really having a practice of being able to reflect. I'm a very deep reflector. So, as I said, formal learning is important, but for me, wisdom comes from experience. And we must not undermine that or underestimate that.
Well, good luck with carrying on with your, well, not with carrying on with your doctorate. Good luck with finishing it.
Well,
Oh my
it's
goodness.
carrying on. Yes, it is still carrying on because, still only a quarter of the way through. So, yeah, it's carrying on for sure.
A quarter of the way through sounds pretty good to me, especially when you're clearly incredibly busy with work as well.
Yeah, it is linked. I have to say, though, that it is linked to my day job. So my doctorate is going to be looking at thinking about what causes women, especially women from an ethnic minority background, from getting into those board level roles. So it is very close to my heart, but again, it's very current to what I do.
Well, for me, it has just been absolutely amazing speaking to you today. I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's an incredible honor, Faye. Thank you for inviting me.
It's wonderful to have you here with me all the way at the end of the show. I really hope you've enjoyed the episode and that you liked hearing from Funmi. If you have got any key insights or key takeaways, or there was something that just really leapt out at you, please do let me know. I'd absolutely love to hear from you. If you're watching the video version of this on YouTube, then just pop me a comment in the comments section below. Or if you're listening to the audio version, then please do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love being on LinkedIn. I think I'm a complete LinkedIn geek. I'm on there quite a lot. So I'll definitely get your message and I will reply to it. You can find me on there as myself, which is Fay Wallis, FayWallis. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to being back again soon in 2 weeks' time with the next episode for you. In fact, I'm really excited. I know I always say I'm excited about the episodes, but I'm really excited about the next episode because I know the Chief People Officer really well who's coming on the show. She is someone who I know personally and invited on, and I can't wait for you to meet her.